There's a moment, and you probably know it well, when someone in your life becomes a stranger. Not literally, not officially, but something shifts. The person sitting across from you at breakfast is the same face, the same body, but something behind their eyes has changed. They laugh differently, or they don't laugh at all. They respond to things that used to excite them with a flat shrug. They get irritated by things that never bothered them before. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they become suddenly cheerful, suddenly reckless, suddenly obsessed with something new, and you can't figure out where this version of them came from. And you think, what happened to you? You ask around. You talk to friends. And everyone gives you the same comfortable explanation. People change. They say it like it's a weather report. Casual, expected. As if transformation is just something that happens to humans, the way rust happens to metal, slowly and without reason. But that's not true. And deep down, you know it's not true. Because people don't just change. Something changes them. There is always, without exception, a reason. And the fact that you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. It means it's buried somewhere the person hasn't shown you yet, or somewhere they haven't looked themselves. That is what this entire video is about. Not the surface level observation that someone isn't the same anymore, but the invisible machinery underneath. The gears and wires and pressure points that cause a human being to transform. Sometimes overnight in ways that confuse, hurt, or frighten the people around them. And I want to tell you up front, some of what you're about to hear will be uncomfortable. Because it will make you rethink people you thought you understood, and maybe even rethink yourself. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently about the people in your life, take a second, hit subscribe, leave a like, and stay with me until the end, because the final part of this video carries a message I think everyone needs to hear. Let's begin with a truth that sounds simple, but is actually radical when you fully absorb it. Behavior is never the cause. Behavior is always the consequence, always. Every action a person takes, every shift in how they show up, every new pattern that seems to appear from nowhere is the end result of something that already happened inside them. You're not watching a change begin. You're watching it arrive. The change itself started long before you noticed it, in a place you were never invited to see. And this is why sudden behavioral changes feel so jarring. It's not that they happen fast. It's that we only become aware of them after they've already been building for days, weeks, sometimes months. The person didn't flip a switch. The switch was being slowly turned, click by click, and we simply weren't listening closely enough to hear it. So what turns that switch? The first and most common answer is something psychologists call a threshold event. This is the moment when accumulated pressure finally exceeds a person's capacity to contain it. Think of it like a glass filling with water. Every stressor, every disappointment, every unspoken frustration, every swallowed emotion adds a little more to the glass. And for a while, the person manages it. They hold it together. They seem fine. They are fine, technically, because the glass hasn't overflowed yet. But then, one day, something small happens. An offhand comment. A forgotten plan. A text that went unanswered. Something that, on its own, means almost nothing. But it's the drop that makes the glass spill. And suddenly, the person explodes, or shuts down, or walks away, or becomes someone you don't recognize. And you're standing there thinking, all of this over that? But it was never about that. It was about everything the glass had been holding before that final drop fell. You saw the overflow. You didn't see the filling. This is one of the most important things to understand about human behavior. The trigger is almost never the cause. The trigger is just the last thing that happened before the breaking point. And if you focus only on the trigger, you will never understand the change. Now let me take this somewhere more personal, because threshold events explain the mechanics, but they don't explain the experience. They don't explain what it feels like from the inside when someone reaches that point. There is a psychological concept that rarely makes it into everyday conversation, but it should, because it explains so much of what we see in people who suddenly change. It's called identity disruption. And it happens when a person's internal image of who they are collides with a reality that contradicts it. Here's what that looks like. Imagine someone who has always seen themselves as strong, capable, in control. That identity has been their anchor for years. And then something happens. A failure, a betrayal, a loss, something that makes them feel weak. Not just momentarily weak, but fundamentally weak in a way that threatens the very story they've been telling themselves about who they are. What do? They can't just sit with it. The gap between who they believe they are and who they suddenly feel like is too painful, too destabilizing. So their psyche does what it does best: it adapts. It shifts, it rebuilds. And that rebuilding process is what you see from the outside as a sudden change. The person isn't becoming someone new. They're trying to survive a version of themselves they weren't prepared to meet. Sometimes this looks like withdrawal. They pull away because the old version of them, the one you knew, the one they showed you, no longer feels authentic, and the new version isn't ready to be seen. Sometimes it looks like aggression. They push people away because closeness feels threatening when you're in the middle of falling apart. And sometimes it looks like reinvention, a sudden obsession with change, new habits, new friends, new priorities, as if they're trying to build a new person on top of the rubble of the old one. None of this is random. All of it is an attempt to restore internal coherence, to make the outside match whatever seismic shift has happened on the inside. And it happens faster than you think. A single event, a single realization, a single conversation can shatter someone's self-image so thoroughly that they begin reconstructing their entire personality within days. I want to pause here and address something important, because there's a layer to this that most videos on this topic completely skip, and it's the layer that actually matters most for the people watching. When someone you love changes suddenly, your first instinct is to make it about you. You think, "What did I do?" You replay conversations. You search for the moment you said the wrong thing, missed the right cue, failed to show up in the way they needed. And in doing so, you place yourself at the center of their psychological process, as if you are both the cause and the cure. But the truth is more humbling than that, and ultimately more freeing. Most of the time, you are not the reason someone changed. You might be the context in which the change became visible, the relationship where it surfaced, the person standing closest when the earthquake hit. But you are not the earthquake. People carry entire inner worlds that exist independently of the people around them. Worlds built from childhood experiences, from old wounds that never fully healed, from beliefs they formed at 5 years old that still silently govern their decisions at 35. When those internal worlds shift, the external behavior follows, and anyone standing nearby gets caught in the wake. This doesn't mean you're irrelevant. It doesn't mean your presence doesn't matter. It means that the change you're witnessing often started in a room you've never been inside. And trying to fix it by analyzing your own actions is like trying to stop a flood by examining the last raindrop. Now, there's another mechanism I want to explore. One that operates even more quietly than identity disruption, and it has to do with the way the brain processes emotional overload. When a person experiences sustained stress, prolonged emotional conflict, or unresolved grief, their nervous system doesn't just cope, it reconfigures. The body shifts from what psychologists call the window of tolerance, the range of emotional intensity a person can handle while remaining functional, into a state of either hyperarousal or hypoarousal. In hyperarousal, the person becomes reactive, anxious, on edge, easily triggered. In hypoarousal, they shut down. They become flat, disconnected, emotionally absent. They stop reacting to things that should provoke a response. They seem numb. Both of these states produce behavioral changes that, from the outside, look sudden and unexplainable. But they're not sudden at all. They're the nervous system's emergency protocol. They're what happens when a person's internal alarm system has been ringing for so long that the brain decides the only option is to change the entire operating mode. And this is something I really need you to hear. When someone shuts down emotionally, when they go flat, when they stop engaging, when they seem like they just don't care anymore, that is not apathy. That is a survival response. Their brain has determined that feeling the full weight of what's happening is too dangerous, so it turns the volume down on everything. Not just the pain, everything. Joy, love, connection, motivation, all of it gets muted. Because the brain can't selectively numb. When it shuts down the bad, it shuts down the good too. So the person who suddenly seems cold, distant, indifferent, the person who used to light up and now barely reacts, they might not be choosing to disconnect from you. They might be disconnected from themselves. And that's a very different thing with a very different solution. I want to take a quick moment here to be transparent with you. I know this video uses an AI-generated voice, but there's a real human behind every word. My name is Fernando, and I genuinely care about the people who take the time to watch this content. I hope you and your family are forever blessed. Okay, let's continue. There's a pattern I haven't talked about yet, and it's the one that hides in plain sight. It's the pattern of accumulated silence. Most people think that sudden behavioral changes come from dramatic events, a breakup, a death, a job loss, something big and obvious. And sometimes that's true. But more often than not, the changes that feel the most sudden come from the quietest sources. They come from things that were never said, from needs that were never expressed, from boundaries that were crossed so gently, so gradually, that no single moment felt worth fighting over, but the accumulation changed everything. This is one of the most dangerous dynamics in human relationships. A person smiles through small discomforts. They let things slide. They tell themselves it's not a big deal. They absorb one micro disappointment after another, each one too small to mention, too minor to argue about. And over time, without anyone noticing, the internal landscape shifts. Resentment builds in silence. Distance grows without a single argument to mark its beginning, and then one day, something breaks. Not with a bang, but with a quiet turning away. The person who was always patient suddenly isn't. The person who was always available suddenly retreats. And everyone around them says, "Where did this come from?" But it didn't come from one place. It came from 1,000 small places, each one invisible on its own, devastating in combination. If you've ever watched someone change and thought it came out of nowhere, consider the possibility that it came from everywhere, from every small moment they absorbed without speaking, until the weight of all those moments became too heavy to carry quietly. This is also why people sometimes change most dramatically around the people who are closest to them. Because those are the relationships where the most is left unsaid, where the stakes feel too high for honesty, where the fear of conflict is so strong that silence becomes the default, and silence, when it fills up long enough, eventually becomes distance. Now I want to address the question that's probably been forming in your mind throughout this video. How do you tell the difference? How do you know if someone's change is temporary, a storm that will pass, or permanent, a fundamental shift in who they are? The honest answer is that you can't always tell immediately, but there are signals. The first signal is rigidity. When someone changes in a healthy way, even if the change is uncomfortable, there's flexibility in it. They can talk about it even if it's difficult. They can acknowledge that things are different. They might not have all the answers, but there's movement, openness, a willingness to be seen in the middle of the transition. But when the change is driven by unprocessed pain, by fear, by a crisis that hasn't been confronted, the person becomes rigid. They close off. They insist nothing is wrong. They refuse to examine what's happening. That rigidity is not strength. It's a wall, and walls aren't built around things that are healing. They're built around things that are still bleeding. The second signal is duration. Everyone has bad days, bad weeks even. A temporary shift in behavior, lasting a few days to a couple of weeks, especially during a stressful period, is usually the nervous system doing what it needs to do, and it typically resolves on its own once the pressure decreases. But when the change persists beyond a few weeks, when the person settles into a new behavioral pattern with no sign of returning to their baseline, that's when you should pay close attention. Not with alarm, but with care. The third signal, and this is the one most people miss, is the gap between words and actions. If someone tells you everything is fine, but their behavior tells a completely different story, believe the behavior. Not because they're lying to you intentionally, but because behavior is the language of the unconscious. It speaks what the mouth refuses to, and the unconscious doesn't know how to lie. Now let me tell you the part I saved for the end, the part that ties all of this together. There is a reason this topic affects us so deeply. There is a reason watching someone change fills us with something close to grief, even when the person is still standing right in front of us. And the reason is this: when someone changes, it doesn't just alter them. It alters the relationship. And when the relationship changes, it alters something inside of you. We don't just love people. We build ourselves, partially, through them. Our identity is not formed in isolation. It's formed in connection. The way someone sees you becomes part of how you see yourself. The way someone treats you becomes part of how you understand your own worth. And when that person changes, when the mirror they held up to you suddenly reflects something different, you're not just losing a version of them. You're losing a version of yourself that only existed in relation to who they used to be. This is why it hurts so much, not because they changed, but because their change forces you to change too, and you weren't ready. You didn't choose it. You didn't see it coming. And now you're standing in a relationship that no longer matches the internal map you built for it. And you have to decide whether to redraw the map or walk away. And neither option feels fair. But here's what I want to leave you with, and I mean this deeply. The fact that people change is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Humans are not static creatures. We are not meant to stay the same. And the people around us are not meant to stay the same either. The discomfort you feel when someone shifts is not a sign that something is broken. It's a sign that something is alive, because only dead things stay the same. The question isn't whether the people you love will change. They will. The question is whether you can hold space for the change without losing yourself in it. Whether you can witness someone becoming something new without taking it as a personal verdict. Whether you can stay curious when everything in you wants to be certain and stay open when everything in you wants to close. That's the real skill. Not preventing change, not predicting it, but meeting it with enough steadiness to say, I see that something is different and I'm still here. Not because I understand it yet, but because I'm willing to try. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about the people who suddenly change. They're not trying to hurt you. Most of the time, they're not even trying to change at all. They're just responding to something inside them that became impossible to ignore. And in the middle of that response, they might lose their way. They might lose their words. They might even lose you for a while. But if you can resist the urge to write the ending before the story is finished, if you can stay present in the discomfort of not knowing, you might discover something extraordinary. You might discover that the person standing in front of you isn't gone. They're just becoming, and the version of them that emerges on the other side of this change might be someone even deeper, even realer, even more worthy of the connection you've been holding on to. But you'll only see that if you stay long enough to look.